The body keeps the score. If the memory of trauma is encoded in the viscera, in heartbreaking and gut-wrenching emotions, in autoimmune disorders and muscle pain, then the mind cannot simply erase it. People often imagine that when someone breaks mentally, it happens suddenly, like a switch flips, like something snaps. But the truth is far quieter and far more unsettling. Most psychological breakdowns don't begin with chaos. They begin with adaptation. They begin with a child learning very early that the world is unpredictable, that safety is conditional, that attention comes and goes without explanation. So the child adjusts, they become observant, they learn to read moods before words are spoken, they sense tension in silence, they notice what others miss because missing it once was too costly. This isn't weakness, it's intelligence. The nervous system doesn't ask, "Is this fair?" It asks, "What keeps me alive?" And so the body learns. It learns to stay alert even when nothing seems wrong. It learns to suppress reactions that might upset others. It learns that being invisible is safer than being honest. Over time, this constant adjustment stops feeling like a response. It starts feeling like personality. People say things like, "I've always been anxious. I've always been sensitive. I've always been like this." But always usually has a beginning. In many cases, the breakdown doesn't come from trauma that was obvious. It comes from what wasn't there, the comfort that didn't arrive, the protection that never showed up, the questions that went unanswered. Neglect doesn't need violence to be damaging. Sometimes it's simply the absence of repair. A child can survive almost anything except being unseen. When emotional needs are consistently unmet, the brain adapts by lowering expectations, not consciously, biologically. The nervous system shifts into a state of quiet vigilance, always scanning, always preparing, always bracing. This is how hypervigilance is born. At first, it looks like maturity, the easy child, the independent one, the one who doesn't ask for much. But inside, the body is working overtime. Stress hormones circulate more often than they should. Muscles remain slightly tense, even at rest. Sleep becomes lighter, more fragile. The child learns to exist in a low-grade emergency without realizing it. And here's the part most people miss. The mind may forget, but the body does not. The body keeps a record of what the environment felt like, not what happened, but how dangerous it seemed. That record lives in posture, in breathing patterns, in gut reactions, in a baseline sense that something is always about to go wrong. As years pass, the person becomes functional. They go to school, they work, they form relationships. From the outside, everything appears normal, but inside, the nervous system never truly stands down. This is why breakdowns rarely happen during the worst moments. They happen later, when the person finally slows down, when there's space to feel. The system that survived childhood now finds itself exhausted in adulthood. What once kept the person safe now begins to suffocate them. They may start to feel overwhelmed by small things, emotionally reactive without knowing why, drained even after rest. They tell themselves they're overreacting, that they're broken, that something is wrong with them. But what's happening is not madness, it's accumulation. Years of suppressed emotion, years of self-monitoring, years of living slightly outside the body. Eventually, the nervous system demands to be heard, not politely, not gently. This is where many people first encounter panic attacks or sudden emotional collapses or a sense of losing control. They think, I'm falling apart. In reality, they are finally feeling what they were never allowed to feel safely. The breakdown is not the beginning of the problem. It is the end of suppression. And that is why it feels so frightening. Because when a person has built their identity around holding it together, the moment it starts to unravel feels like annihilation. But this unraveling did not come out of nowhere. It was built slowly, quietly, over years of adaptation that were never meant to be permanent. In the next part, we'll look at how these early survival strategies turn into adult patterns, and why so many people confuse trauma responses with who they truly are. When a child grows up adapting to emotional unpredictability, those adaptations don't disappear with age, they evolve. What once kept them safe quietly becomes the lens through which they experience the world. By adulthood, these survival strategies no longer feel like strategies. They feel like self. This is how trauma hides in plain sight. A person may believe they are naturally anxious, overly responsible, emotionally distant, or constantly self-critical. But these traits were not chosen, they were learned. For someone who had to stay alert as a child, calm can feel unfamiliar, even unsafe. Silence feels heavy. Stillness feels wrong. So the mind looks for something to worry about. Not because the person enjoys suffering, but because the nervous system is conditioned to function in tension. Peace feels like a threat when chaos was once the norm. This is why many people who grew up emotionally neglected struggle when life finally stabilizes. Healthy relationships feel confusing. Kindness feels suspicious. Consistency feels boring or unreliable. The body doesn't trust what it didn't grow up with. Another common pattern is emotional self-erasure. As children, many learned that expressing needs led to disappointment, rejection, or conflict. So they adapted by minimizing themselves. They became agreeable, low maintenance, helpful. They learned to sense what others needed and provided it before being asked. Over time, this becomes people-pleasing, but people-pleasing is not about kindness, it's about safety. It's the belief that being useful prevents abandonment, that saying yes avoids conflict, that being needed is the closest thing to being loved. The cost of this adaptation is enormous. These individuals often lose access to their own preferences. They struggle to identify what they want. They feel guilty for having needs at all. And when they finally reach a breaking point, they don't explode outward, they collapse inward. Burnout, depression, emotional numbness. They tell themselves they're weak for being tired, even though they've been carrying the emotional weight of others for years. Another adaptation shows up as emotional detachment. Some children learn early that closeness leads to pain, that vulnerability invites disappointment, so they survive by pulling inward. They appear calm, independent, self-sufficient. But this emotional distance is not strength, it's protection. The body learned that connection is risky, so it limits attachment to avoid hurt. As adults, these individuals often struggle with intimacy. They crave connection but feel overwhelmed by it. They want closeness but panic when it arrives. They may sabotage relationships without understanding why. This isn't because they don't care. It's because closeness activates old alarms in the nervous system, alarms that were installed long before logic could intervene. Here's the most important thing to understand. These patterns are not flaws. They are evidence of resilience. They are the body's attempt to survive environments that did not meet its needs. But what protected you once can imprison you later. The mind continues to run outdated programs even when the danger is gone. And eventually the cost of these adaptations becomes too high. The person feels disconnected from themselves. They don't recognize who they are outside of their roles. They feel empty despite being functional. This emptiness is often mistaken for meaninglessness, but it is actually disconnection. Disconnection from emotion, from desire, from the body. The nervous system, once shaped by survival, now demands something different. It demands integration. This is where the fear of going crazy often emerges, because when old coping mechanisms stop working, it feels like losing control. But what's actually happening is reorganization. The system is trying to update itself. In the next part, we'll explore what happens when suppressed emotions resurface, why the mind resists this process, and why breakdowns often feel worse before healing begins. At some point, the person reaches what feels like the edge. Not because something dramatic happens, but because there is nothing left to suppress. This is the moment most people describe as going crazy. They feel unlike themselves. Their thoughts feel unfamiliar, their emotions feel uncontrollable. What frightens them most is not the pain, it's the loss of control. They've spent their entire life managing themselves, monitoring reactions, containing emotions, holding everything together, so when that control slips, even slightly, it feels catastrophic. But this moment is not a failure of the mind, it is the nervous system reaching capacity. Psychological breakdown is not an explosion, it is a collapse of containment. For years, the body carried what the mind could not afford to acknowledge. And now the cost of holding it all in has become higher than the cost of feeling it. This is why breakdowns often happen during moments that seem safe, during rest, during success, during stillness. The danger is gone, but the body doesn't know that yet. The person may experience racing thoughts, intrusive memories, emotional flooding, or deep dissociation. They may fear losing touch with reality, but what they are actually losing is an outdated survival identity. The version of themselves that existed to endure is beginning to dissolve, and that feels terrifying, because when survival has shaped your identity, letting go of it feels like death. There is often grief at this stage, not just grief for what happened, but grief for who they had to become. The child who learned to stay quiet, the adult who learned to stay strong, the person who learned to survive at the cost of themselves. None of that disappears easily. This is why many people resist healing, not consciously, but biologically. Healing threatens the system that once kept them alive. The nervous system doesn't ask whether a pattern is healthy, it asks whether it is familiar. And familiarity feels safer than freedom. So the body fights back. Symptoms intensify. Fear increases. Doubt creeps in. The person wonders if they are truly broken, if this is who they are now. But what is happening is not deterioration, it is reorganization. The system is trying to learn a new way to exist, a way that does not require constant vigilance, a way that allows emotion without collapse, a way that includes safety. This process is slow, non-linear, often uncomfortable. There is no single moment where everything clicks into place. There are moments of clarity followed by setbacks, moments of calm followed by fear, moments of connection followed by withdrawal. This is not regression, it is integration. The mind and body are learning to communicate again. And this is where compassion becomes essential, not self-improvement, not discipline, not forcing change, but recognition. Recognition that the breakdown did not come from weakness. It came from endurance. That the past was brutal, even if no one else saw it. That the body adapted in the only way it knew how. That nothing about this process is random. The person who breaks mentally is not someone who failed to cope. They are someone who coped for too long without support. Understanding this doesn't erase the pain, but it changes the story. From something is wrong with me to something happened to me. And that shift, however small, is often the beginning of real stability. Not because everything is fixed, but because the fight against the body finally ends. The mind no longer tries to dominate what it doesn't understand. It begins to listen. And slowly, quietly, the system learns that it is no longer alone.